Welcome. I think we're all here. If the rest of you could settle in, we will begin. Thank you. Let me start by introducing right off the bat for this topic that has been probably on the agenda of every data commissioners conference now for at least a decade. I thought perhaps after talking about it for 10 years, people would be tired, the audience would be empty, but it continues to be an issue that clearly drives concerns, drives revenue, so it continues to be a big part of business for many companies, and continues to be a big part of concern for policymakers and advocates and consumers. And so we're going to look a little bit at this panel about some of the progress that's been made over the past 10 years, where some of the challenges still are, how different legal structures in Europe, in the US, and elsewhere are starting to press more directly for solutions in this area. And so it's wonderful to be able to lead off this panel with Rosa Barcelo, who has been paying attention to this issue for many years, from her days in the private sector, from her days in the beginning of her public sector career, and certainly now in her role as the legal advisor to the European Data Protection Supervisor. And so, Rosa, the floor is yours for your opening comments to set the stage for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jules. So, good afternoon and welcome to this session on behavioral advertising. As Jules said, I think behavioral advertising is a very important topic. And I wanted to congratulate ILITA on the selection, on the organization, but also on the selection of topic, because behavioral advertisement, as well as anonymization, topics like conflict of law, they are all very topics, very relevant, topics that require careful consideration. We have the protection of individuals, but we cannot apply data protection in a vacuum. We have to take into account technology. We cannot turn our back to technology. It wouldn't be feasible. So, and they require global solutions. So I think that we have here a panel of four distinguished ladies and our moderator, who are all very eager to to share with you their experiences, point of views, and hopefully to make progress towards finding solutions. So thank you, ILITA, for putting together this topic on the panel, allowing us to make this exercise. Now, what we have planned that in the following way. I will introduce them, and then I'll make a 10 minutes presentation of the topic, and then each of the speakers will have 5–10 minutes, and then Jules will take over and start a discussion in which you will be given the opportunity to ask questions. So let's start. We'll start, ladies, I will start with the moderator, presenting him first, with your permission. So Jules Polanski. Jules is the director of the Privacy Forum. It's called Future of Privacy Forum, think tank, which focuses on privacy and technology. I understand he's based in DC, or in DC. And Jules have worked on this privacy and behavioral advertisement, RFID, and relevant issues. Then, to his right, Jane. Jane Horvath is the Global Privacy Counsel for Google. Jane's overlook Google products and services to make sure that they comply with Google's privacy policies and principles, and with the regulation when applicable. Then Anne Todd does something similar, I guess, in Yahoo. So she also looks and works with the team of Yahoo, making sure that the rules and the principle of privacy are embedded in their products. And then Kristen Bock, she works for the Data Protection Authority of Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, and she is the head of a certification program called Europrice, which certifies products and services and delivers a seal. And then Fran Meyer does something similar to Kirsten, but in the United States. She works for Trustee, is the president, and Trustee is also certification seal that certify data protection practices. So with this panel, I think that this is the panel, so I will go to my introductory remarks. Let's see. So, when I see all of you, and my panel, I think that everybody is very knowledgeable on behavioral advertising, about how it works, what the business model, and the technology behind. However, even I think most of you might also be knowledgeable. Just in case, I thought that there's some people who might not know the details. I thought it would be useful, with your permission, to spend just a couple minutes to explaining how it works, how is the business model. So because we will come back to that, so it might be useful just spare. So first idea, who are the players? So behavioral advertisement based on cookies. Who are the players? It's important to remember that we have two main players. We have the websites, normal websites. That could be an online retailer, an online newspaper, an online e-commerce. And then we have the ad network providers. Here we have two ad network provider representatives, Google and Yahoo. And what happened? The retailers, they will rent a space to them. So a little part of the website will be, this is your part, and you, ad network provider, puts in this space the ad you want to put. So basically, I was thinking, in the online world, I have a big, I would say, a building, and I rent a space to them for them to select an advertisement. That will be the equivalent. But in practice, more technology, and excuse me, because I am a lawyer, I don't have a formal university training. I'm sure I might say something that is not fully accurate, but the idea is that to give a flavor of how it works. So, in the way this works is, let me do it with an example. You come to Tel Aviv. You want to come to Tel Aviv, and when you were planning your trip, you went to a website to have to get your airline ticket. So this website, let's imagine, has an agreement with Yahoo. The agreement whereby Yahoo will insert an ad. So you go there, and Yahoo, so let's imagine you go to Travelocity, Yahoo will send you a cookie. So your computer will be cookie 111. Now, next, 2 or 3 days later, you go to the Crown Plaza Hotel website. So, and the Crown Plaza Hotel website happened to have an agreement also with Yahoo. So what happened is that when you go to the Crown Plaza, Yahoo will be able to visualize that, oh, this is the same computer that 2 days ago went to Travelocity. So this computer now goes to Crown Plaza, Jerusalem. So this, in a couple seconds, Yahoo will be able to say, well, maybe I will serve to this an advertisement that will be on the basis of what he said before. So this person might be going to Jerusalem. Why don't I show a car rental so that this person might be interested in going to Masada? So let's show a car rental. Or let's show an ad for a tour operator. Or let's show an ad for... So this is very basic, and I'm sure that is not perfectly accurate. But over the time, as there are a lot of websites that have an agreement with Yahoo or with Google, you can, at the end, construct a robust profile. Now, over the time, it could be something that is important from you. So they might not know what is your name. They might not know that is Rosa Barceló or whoever, but they might know a lot of things, a lot of assumptions about you, about what you want to see. So this is basically how it works. And now I would like to turn into, this is allowed, to European law. This is allowed, it can happen, but the European law has some requirements. And I'm going to talk about European law because I'm an European lawyer. I work for an European regulator, and my office, the EDPS, has been involved in that. But I want to stress something, is that EU regulators, we have, in a way, followed the steps of other authorities, other people. In particular, I think we should recognize the leadership of the FTC on this field. We have used a lot their work, and get a lot of knowledge about what they have done. So I will talk about EU law because I don't know enough of the American, but it's right to recognize that they are leading this field. And so, what does EU law say? Well, in last year, we had the telecom package. One directive that is part of the telecom package, the e-privacy directive, introduced an article, better amended an existing one, Article 5.3. Article 5.3 basically says what, the following. If you plant information, you take information from the computer of an individual, or if you put information in an individual's computer, and when I say computer, take it more broadly, it could be and a device. Then you can do that, but you need to inform the individual and to obtain their consent. So that's what it says. In the past, this replaced an older article which said very similar. You can do it if you inform the individual and to allow him to refuse this processing, to object to this processing. So there was a slight change. Now, up until that moment, or until recently, or even now, the way companies have complied is the following. They inform people. The publisher has a privacy policy, and the privacy policy will say somewhere, by the way, we use cookies served by a third-party advertising company, and so they inform. And how do they give the right to refuse? And we'll say, well, by the way, if you want to refuse this, go fiddle with your browser. You know that the browser has the ability to allow you to not receive cookies, so third-party cookies or first-party. So go set your browser in a mode that you will not get more cookies and delete the existing ones. So that's how it has. And in fact, regulators have been accepting this practice, have been felt that this was compliant. So since then, the companies and even regulators, we have all been wondering, and now what? Because now we have something that says that we need consent. The business model is not, it was based on this ability, empowerment to go to fiddle with your browser. But there is a slight difference between that. So what should we do now? So I think that from different angles, we are all trying to see how this could be done in a way or whether the business model have to change or what to do. This is the situation. And I would like to go a little bit, just a moment deeper. It's like in Europe, we have now facing this question various initiatives. Number one, the European Commission, DG Information Society, which is the DG in charge of this directive, the Commission has encouraged business to come with the self-regulatory answer. Not completely self-regulatory, because we have an article, so it will not be completely self-regulatory, but on the basis of this article, business, please come to us and let us know how this could be complied in a way that individuals are given the possibility to consent, and in a way that maybe allows you to continue. That's on one side. And this is an ongoing initiative. Business are responding. It's not finished. At the same time, the Commission has issued a paper addressed to member states, because member states, they have to implement this law, and they're still a little bit wondering how we do, addressed to member states, telling them how they understand that this should be complied. The Article 29 Working Party in June also issued guidance addressed to themselves and to companies about how themselves would, on the 27 member states, implement it, and asking companies maybe to take into account. And my final three remarks is, I don't want to go into what the Working Party 29 said, the opinion is available, but just a very few points. Article 29 asks for more transparency. So Article 29 says this idea of having your privacy policy, information, by the way, we use cookies, this is not good enough. And last week, we had in the EDPS a group of students, and the students were asking questions very basically. I said, well, have you seen the information on cookies in the privacy policy? And they looked weird. And I thought maybe they don't know what are cookies. But then one raised their hand, what is the privacy policy? So it was a different. So that's what the Working Party said. The Working Party encouraged and acknowledged that there are initiatives that are very welcome, the use of icons and similar devices that will be much more just-in-time notice, or other type of notice that would be more effective. In this regard, I was thinking today, well, a notice like in the previous session, somebody said, well, a notice what you have in the tobacco box, that will be something that people will see. I don't know, an icon like the CCTV cameras, I think everybody knows. So if we could reach this kind of status that you see a CCTV camera little thing, and you know what it means. If in the behavioral advertisement we could see a little sign and everybody knows, that will be a very good starting point. I think that's where we should go. Second, consent. The Working Party also looks at this way of attaining consent or right to refuse. Okay, go to fiddle with your browser settings. I mean, I think it was Peter Cullen who said, well, his mother will never be able to go to the browser and change the browser. My mother, my father certainly will not be able to do it. So are they deemed to have consented because they haven't changed the browser? I mean, I would just take the question to you. You yourself, maybe you are very knowledgeable, your parents, mothers, sisters, do you consider they should be deemed to have consented to be tracked because they haven't changed the browser? I think it's very difficult to sustain. And something important is that under EU law, we have a definition of consent under the directive. Consent must be, it doesn't say express, but consent must be an indication, express indication, sorry, not express, it's a specific indication of the data subject of the individual wishes. So this is the threshold, and this is the threshold that the European Court of Justice in the event will judge. So from a lawyer perspective, you cannot go very far from that because this is the word. So I think that I would finish with that and understand and say this is the tiny piece, consent, whether we have consent. But there are other aspects to consider because if we have consented, data protection doesn't finish here. There are very important topics that I think in this area are not addressed, such as the security of the data, the purpose limitation, all of that we have not touched upon, but they are the data protection safeguards that would apply to this information. These are as important or even more than the consent, but in a way the discussion has been monopolized in this point. And I think I would leave it here. I don't know if I took too much, but I think that each of you maybe will continue going deeper on the different points. So,
well, thank you. Thank you, Rosa, for that very nice introduction. If you could pull up my first slide, what I'm going to try to do before we jump into being very interactive, many of us have been on, well, hundreds maybe of panels on this issue over the years, and so we know each other's presentations already, so instead of doing that, we're going to try to mix it up a little. I'm going to try to take you one step more down the line. I think Rosa gave us the big picture of behavioral advertising, but I think it's useful to understand the breadth and the scope of this ecosystem. And so before I give you the ecosystem, let's start with the little smaller piece, right? Somebody visits a web page. There's code on the web page that is sent to the user's browser. Some of the code says, put these words. Some of it says, make the border blue. Some of it says, a picture needs to go here. Browser, go to CNN, go to some company that is providing the picture of the day or the news story and send it in. Maybe other pieces of content are being sent in. In addition, the advertising space very often is being sent in. In the beginning of the world, sites actually try to sell advertising themselves, and there are still some that do. If you're a big newspaper and you have a sales force, well, maybe some of them will sell some of the ads. But very quickly, this became a real specialized business. In the early days, websites would literally put a banner up themselves. But just managing that became very complicated. How many can you sell? How many people will visit your site next week? And if you promise an advertiser that you're going to show their ad 12,000 times, and that's all they're paying for, how do you keep track of how many times? And so the system started becoming very efficient and very specialized. So today, the user visits the web page. The browser will probably go to 20 or 30 different places at any perhaps typical commercial site, or frankly, even if you set up a blog and you use some of the basic code that you can take from some of the popular free tools, your browser, when you visit such a page, is not going just to www.thisnicesite.com. It is bouncing around the internet, and it is showing up, and it is showing certain information. The same information, very often, that it shows the website that it is visiting. It is showing that. And you can see that a little bit, right? If you start being a little bit sophisticated about looking at the page, you can often see the browser showing you at the bottom, and sometimes they don't all respond very quickly. When it goes quickly, it looks like it's just one website, but in fact, when it goes slowly, you'll see little pieces, you know, sometimes filling in slowly, or maybe the entire page will be hung up because one of those partners is not doing it. So my browser, while I visit my favorite site, is visiting an ad-serving server, and it shows up. The ad server doesn't know who it is, so certain information is conveyed in that request. If you take your browser today and you'd like to see some of these instructions, let's assume we're using Internet Explorer, and you say view source, you'll see the HTML code on the page, and you'll see how it explains the different pieces of the page, and you often can see the ad tag if you look for the name of DoubleClick or of Right Media, one of the Yahoo companies that does ad serving, or the ad server that works as part of Microsoft, or many, many others. You can see the user's browser is going to go to that location. And so, well, the ad server needs to know, well, who is this? What website is sending me this user? Because I have ads that have been sold for that website. So the site the user is coming from. The cookie that that ad server may have set, if they've ever seen this browser before, is exchanged back and forth. This is user number 9214, whatever number I've been assigned. The IP address, of course, whenever the browser shows up at a server, the IP address of the destination that the information is going to be sent back is then also seen, and very often, of course, stored. We'll talk about what needs to be seen and what needs to be stored and the different ways that it's used as we start drilling into this. And so we have a cookie that's being exchanged between a third party. Let's talk about whether it's always a third party. Maybe I actually even own this ad serving company. Maybe it's my ad server in my company. Maybe it's my ad server in my company, but it's being stored and lives in another country. Or maybe it belongs to a service who's providing it for me, but I'm the one in control of it. Or maybe it's a completely different company who's selling the ads and has the complete right because, like Rosa said, they've rented it. But it's not always the case. There are all sorts of different gradations that, that can be taking place. It could be a third party. It could be the first party with somebody else's server and so forth. Okay, so an IP address we talked about. We talked about a cookie. We talked about this is the site that the user is coming from. But then that site may actually know you. You may have registered at this website, and you may have given them various information. You may have filled in things. You may have purchased from them. So they might send that information along to the ad server. This is a customer who buys from me this sort of product. So ad server, be a little smarter, make a decision to show the ad to this customer who I know something about. Again, whether it's behavioral or not, we can discuss. But I want you to get the point that there's lots of steps between simply putting an ad with a little bit more data that happens to be the website's data that perhaps the ad server may have. How could the ad server have other data? They've never seen this user before. They've set this cookie when they perhaps saw them the first time. This ad server may have a relationship with lots of other websites, and it may have permission, since it's selling the ads for all of these websites, to keep track of that information. Now, it's probably keeping that information anyway because it has to give a report. Again, let's not do any behavioral yet, but I need to give a report to that website how many ads were shown, and so a certain record of information is going to be kept. But the ad network may actually have permission to keep and use that data to create what we'll call an online behavioral profile, and then when it makes a decision to serve the ad, to do so because of what it knows about the user's previous web visits. Okay, so we built up to where ad serving was 10 years ago, when I was the Chief Privacy Officer at DoubleClick, and I visited many of the regulators in Europe, and the FTC started paying close attention. That's what ad serving was 10 years ago. So I want us to think about whether we're going to solve where it is today. That was 10 years ago. Today it looks a little bit more like this, because what has occurred is things have continued to become more and more efficient. When I had a relationship with an ad network, I had to do a deal with them and say, you'll sell all my ads, or you'll sell half my ads, I'm going to sell some of them myself. What happened to make this process more effective was exchanges, locations where all the buyers and all the sellers could show up, and instead of having an exclusive relationship, you're my ad network, we're in business, you'll sell my ads, you'll do some behavioral because you have lots of other sites, and we're part of a big cooperative. Location is set up where the buyers and sellers of banner ads can bid against each other and get and pay the best price for the ad space. So let's consider that perhaps an ad exchange. Now, we've also talked about data. This website that we talked about, it knows some of its customers. It has some information about buying and selling that it has done, or maybe they filled out some registration, and it has it linked to a cookie. So if we set up another location, and we're going to call this one a data exchange, where again, the user, because of the cookie, because of the ability to have an ad tag that sends the user's browser quickly while the page is being created, can show up and provide some data about the user. So now, in addition to buying ads with a behavioral profile, what kinds of websites has this user been to, I can buy what sort of purchaser is this user from things they actually purchase, not just websites that they visit. So alongside this fairly complicated system of ad exchanges and data exchanges, there may be another layer, because this has gotten very complicated for this poor website now. He's got all this stuff happening. So he may have a company that works for him to help manage and optimize. So perhaps another cookie and another set of analysis to decide which ad exchange, which ad network, how can I get the best revenue based on the data that might be available about this user. Now, there are a number of other companies. Again, are they behavioral or not? We can debate all day. There are companies who simply may be in the business of helping this website understand who are your users. Are you putting out material that they like? How do they travel throughout your site? And so they will set a cookie, and so they will also get that same view of the user. Here's this user who is coming back again and again. Here's how they travel through the site. Lots of the users don't ever make it past the homepage. Where are they getting lost? So analysis might be done to understand how and why users travel. A profile might be built about them, and the site may try to sell its inventory saying, here, my users, here's how they act, here's what they're all about. So you've got analytics companies. You have companies that are in the affiliate marketing business. We talked about banner ads and clicks, or selling based on how many ads you're showing to a user. But there are some people who just want to sell on purchases. I don't trust these clicks. I don't trust that just seeing an ad is going to make a user like me. Prove that a customer purchased. So again, a cookie may be set, and the user may be tracked back to a transaction, and then a commission is paid only if a sale is made. Affiliate marketing. Again, these things all look the same. They use the same sets of data very often, the same sorts of ad refers technology, but they're different business models and perhaps different solutions to figure out consent and transparency and what's going on. Okay, so I'll pass away from that just one second, and I'll turn to my panelists. And before we start tossing out some questions, anybody want to throw out sort of an initial thought or statement, or shall we? Yes, Fran.
This may be provocative, but is all this bad?
Is all this
bad?
Is all this bad? Well, these
are
good. In other words,
is there some value? I think we've missed an important thing is, what is the value of behavioral advertising, and what is the potential harm? Okay,
well, I'll perhaps use that as the opening question. Why is anyone doing all this? What is this all about? Obviously, money is made. Does the user really get a better experience? What would you tell us the value to the user? Is that maybe your question? Because clearly we know that there's revenue to be had. So the question is...
We didn't really even talk about that, actually. So.
Well, we know there's revenue. So can we say, what's the value? Is there some value to the user of all this taking place?
I thought you were going to ask if there's not a quiz at the end or anything, so no one needs to worry about that. But I think this wouldn't exist if there wasn't value for the user. The idea is no website in existence exists without trying to serve a customer and trying to give an experience that's valuable. And I think we often think of this in terms of the large websites that you often think of, whether it's Google or Yahoo or Microsoft or Facebook or others. But there are a lot of smaller publishers in the marketplace. And I think if we think about this in terms of what this brings to many other players in the market, not just the large players, but a lot of smaller content providers, publishers online who provide content largely free of charge. This is the model. This is one version of the model that helps enable those companies to stay in business. But I think it's important to step back, and I know we have some visuals here that I think will help talk a little bit about what companies are doing to try to take this whole thing that we've heard about and simplify it and actually make it more understandable and actually present to consumers the type of information that's going to be useful for them to actually act upon, because I don't think anybody expects anyone to be able to know all of this. I have a driver's license, I can drive a car, but I can't completely map out for you how a combustion engine works. We don't expect consumers to be able to understand all of this before they use our services. I think there's certain expectations that they have, and we want to meet those expectations. But I was struck when we started this whole this panel and looking at the title, thinking back a decade on behavioral advertising, because it has been a decade since behavioral advertising has been with us. I joined Yahoo in 1998, which is a little more than a decade. When I look back to that time, I think of a couple of things. One, I actually joined not to do privacy, because nobody worked in privacy in 1998. I joined as data miner number 2 for Yahoo. I was hired because we were registering users, and a friend of mine who built Yahoo Mail called me up and said, we need to figure out what to do with the data. So I showed up to figure out what to do with the data, and the first thing they told me to do is to figure out what we are not allowed to do with the data. It just happened to coincide, my joining Yahoo in June of 1998, that the FTC, I believe, at that point sent their first report to Congress on online privacy. And then 3 months later, or 4 months later, we had the EU data directive went into effect, and we were worried that all data flows would stop. And so I actually think I should be thanking all of you for my job, first and foremost, because without you, I don't know that I would be so gainfully employed. But these are issues that we have been struggling with for some time. The world looked very different in 1998. Yahoo served 98% of our own ads in 1998. It was a very small, cloistered environment at that point in time. I think the only ad-serving network outside of our own was DoubleClick, and not because we wanted you there, but because our advertisers wanted to use you. So that's kind of the world that we lived in then, and now we fast forward and the world has gotten more complicated, and we're not relying on privacy policies solely. I think back in 1998, it was actually a novelty to have a privacy policy. We joined Trustee in May of 1998, and the idea of fair information principles, the idea of having a privacy policy that laid it out, was revolutionary, and we were one of the first to have it. We posted our first privacy policy in March of 1998, and it was a much shorter and easier to read document. This is before the invasion of the lawyers. So what we're trying to do now is to take that document and not make a user read every part of it, but actually surface to a consumer in a contextual way information that's relevant and necessary to be able to make a decision at a particular moment in time. So I don't know if we have my slides. We had some technical.
Well, I'll tell you.
We can talk about.
Yes. Let's set the stage now for what we are going to see, because our topic is what's happened over this past 10 years. So 10 years ago, Rosa described the basic business model. I've described how it's gotten a lot more complicated. 10 years ago, browser controls were what was available. The Federal Trade Commission, however, sparked by outrage that was kicked off when DoubleClick purchased a data company called Abacus. Abacus was a co-op of catalogers. If you purchased from a catalog in the US and in other places in the world, your information was shared amongst those catalogers, and catalogers would decide, I don't want to send a $3 X number euro nice glossy to everyone in the country, because some of them are male, some are female, some want my product, some never buy from catalogs, and so they would work with their others in the industry to decide who to send to. Not all the advertisers believed that this whole cookie banner ad thing worked. They knew we want people who really buy stuff in the real world. And so when DoubleClick spent $1 billion or so to purchase Abacus, the plan was to take this offline transaction data, what you purchase, and somehow link it to the user's cookie, so that when the user showed up at a website, we didn't have to worry about what websites they'd been to, but the user would get an ad for sweaters because they are someone who buys sweaters offline from a catalog. Great consternation was kicked off. The Federal Trade Commission, many states, 17 state attorneys general began inquiries and class action litigation. DoubleClick and the other ad networks worked together with a lot of direction from the Federal Trade Commission at the time, to come up with an initial set of rules, the Network Advertising Initiative rules. And what they promised was, no, people cannot use browsers. That is not enough. We need to give them an opt-out cookie. And so the requirement was that the websites that worked with an ad network that was doing behavioral profiling had to have a privacy policy. The privacy policy had to say, we're working with an ad network. They track your activity from site to site. Click here if you want to opt out, and here's how you can get your opt-out cookie. In addition, if you're going to take personal info, specifically very defined name, address, blatantly personal info, let's call it, then you can't just tell the user in the privacy policy. You have to tell them on the web page and give them a chance to opt out. And if you're going to add personal info to a profile that you already created, somebody was surfing without their name attached, and you were going to identify their previous web surfing, you had to do that with an express opt-in. And that, for a number of years, was the industry standard. In Europe, unfortunately, many websites took the point of view that since this wasn't personal, the FTC took an interesting point of view. It said, let's assume that this cookie without a name is non-personal, and when you add a name, it's personal, and we'll have two sets of rules for this non-personal privacy policy notice, for the more personal on-the-page opt-out, and then an express opt-in, depending on how it was set up. In Europe, despite guidance over the years from the data regulators, websites traditionally took the point of view, since it's not personal, I can do nothing. So don't even tell me about opt-out cookies and so forth. A lot of the companies that were doing business globally, who had this obligation in the US, were also doing it in Europe. So you had this weird mix of many of the US companies coming here with a stricter set of rules, no law, self-regulation. European companies saying, no, you see here we have a specific law. It's personal, it's not personal. I must take the point of view this is not personal, because if it is personal, I have no idea how I could comply. I don't know where to register, what can I do, blah, 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 blah. And so they were frozen in paralysis, with some exceptions, some of the companies that were bold enough to talk to Kirsten and who went through a process of getting the Europrice seal. So that's where it was years ago. The FTC recently came back, and we'll talk about some of the European decisions along the way that have helped push this along, but most recently the FTC came back and said, we don't think that works anymore. Nobody's reading the privacy policy, they can't understand it, do more, industry. At the same time, a number of companies watching this and capable of doing more, because in the beginning this was ad networks, this was not Yahoo, this was ad networks. Yahoo was selling its own ads. Today, Microsoft, Yahoo, AOL, Google all own these ad networks, and being responsive to some of the concerns, have started to make changes. Some part of this agreement, some on their own. And so I've turned to Jane Horvath. What are the things that in the last years we've seen Google, we've seen DoubleClick do that have added privacy, innovation, transparency to this process?
Thanks, Jules. Happy to talk about it. One thing I did want to add to Anne's comment earlier, the value. Anne stopped in her historical recollections about the year 2001, when there was only one ad network, which was DoubleClick. And something else happened that year. In 2001, there was the dot-com bust. And what basically happened was CPMs, ad CPMs were out of this world. They were very high. Internet websites were being launched. They were being launched on an advertising backbone. Advertisers were paying a fortune to get on the front pages of these websites. And they realized that consumers were not actually looking at the ads, and they weren't getting the return from that. So the money flowed out of the internet, and many startup businesses, many businesses went bankrupt, went out of business. So the drive to have more relevant ads started in that decade, and that's probably one of the major reasons for the development of behavioral advertising. Definitely one of the reasons that search advertising has done well is relevant advertising. So we fast forward to 2007, and that was the year that the major players decided that ad networks would be a valuable investment. Yahoo bought Right Media, Microsoft bought Aquantive, and probably the biggest flashpoint, my company bought DoubleClick. And so there was a lot of discussion here about data, discussion about the antitrust implications of data, and what were we going to do with the data. and were we going to launch behavioral advertising combining data across the network. So at the same time, Jules said that the FTC became involved, and the FTC published their draft guidelines on behavioral advertising. We had not integrated DoubleClick in yet. We were still evaluating whether we were even going to launch behavioral advertising. At that point, we were not using behavioral advertising. We were doing contextual advertising and search advertising. So if you search for Italy, you would see ads based on your search results. We still do that on the search engine. We do not do behaviorally targeted ads on our search engine. And we were also doing contextual advertising on our third-party ad network, what we call the Google Display Network, magazines, newspapers that hire us to serve ads. So if you're in the sports section, you might see an ad for Nike shoes. That's contextual advertising. So we had acquired DoubleClick, and there was great discussion within the company about launching behavioral advertising. A lot of people thought it wasn't transparent. And I'm sure a lot of you, this is a very interesting experiment to do sometime. Clear your cookies and go to your major newspaper website, and then go look at your cookie cache on your browser and see how many cookies are loaded onto your browser. And many of those companies, you have no idea who they are. And so for us, it was very important, and something that we had been doing in the context of our contextual product is that the user actually knows that we were serving the ads. So could I have my slides, please? So in the year that we developed and integrated DoubleClick into Google, we decided there were a few things that we needed to do to increase transparency before we launched the product. And the first thing that we committed to do was to continue to have in-ads notice on our ads. And so whenever you go to a third-party website for which we are serving ads, you'll see ads by Google down the advertisement. We committed to continue that practice. So when you link on the ad, you go to a landing page that then, let's see, oh, I'm so sorry, this is not, what the manager does is it looks at your browser cookie and it lists the interest categories that are associated with that cookie. As Jules and Rosa were describing, as you surf from site to site, there's certain interests that are inferred by that browsing. So you can go to the Ads Preference Manager here. I didn't have any interest categories associated with my cookie. So, whoopsie, flash to the future.
So let me just note, we talked about this set of industry rules that has been updated. We didn't talk about it, but the industry came back and updated the set of rules. It did not require this. This is something that Google, Yahoo, a number of other companies are doing. The entire industry hasn't adopted or agreed that they're going to show the users their profiles. So you're seeing sort of the front edge of this, and we'll see whether others follow. Some of the smaller ad networks have already followed, Lotame, Bluekai, maybe a handful, but the industry rules haven't yet caught up.
So this is my DoubleClick cookie on my Chrome browser, and it's associated, these are the interest categories. And we think this is good for the user, really good for the user, because he can look and say, you know what, I've already bought a car. I don't want to have car advertising anymore. I don't want to see that a Volkswagen Beetle, I've already bought a car. Remove that category. Or, you know what, I'm going to be traveling soon. I'd like to see more travel ads, so I can go and I can add categories. Another commitment that we made was we would not impute interest or infer interest for any sensitive category as they're defined in the European Data Protection Directive, which is actually broader than in the United States. Things like political affiliation are not generally considered sensitive in the US, nor is trade union membership. But we have blocked those categories. You can actually, by using our ads preference managers, you can go in and actually see the totality of the categories that may be inferred by your browsing habits. The last thing that we did is there'd been a lot of criticism about the opt-out. The opt-out is cookie-based, so it's fragile. And if you are someone that really is privacy aware, you're going to be clearing your browser cookies. So you'd have the inconvenience of clearing your browser cookies and, oh gosh, I've got to go opt out again. So we asked our engineers if there was any solution for it, and because the cookie is browser specific, they said, well, we can create an add-on, a browser plugin for each of the major browsers that will make that cookie persistent. So if you clear your cookies, it will leave the opt-out cookie there. So it will respect your preferences, so you can be privacy aware, clear your cookies, but your IBA opt-out will remain there. And then from the Ads Preference Manager, if you want to learn even more about IBA, there's a Learn More button, and unfortunately my slides are so microscopic, but that explains in more detail, including giving an example of what is IBA.
Now, how are users going to know about this? How would anyone learn that there was all this stuff to see behind there? Do I have to go to the privacy policy and investigate, or is there something that's going to wave to me? What did Rosa want? You wanted a candid camera. You wanted the warning surveillance camera. So I'll interject there that when the FTC put out this report, they said, we don't like the privacy policy as a mechanism of telling users things. It's nice to have that, but what's it got to do with talking to the user? What we did at the Future of Privacy Forum is you said, aha, this is an interesting role for us. How about let's not talk to a lawyer, let's not talk to a technologist, let's ask some advertising people who know how to design things, and let's ask them, treat us please like a client. So WPP, a large global agency that has lots of creative people throughout the country, gave us a team, and we said, start from scratch. You know nothing about behavioral. We're going to explain to you that this is happening. Please pretend we're a brand. We're Nike. We want the swoosh to mean, you know, sports, action, feel good, whatever, right? Pay a premium for it. Come up with a whole bunch of different symbols, and we are going to test them with users and see what they think or know. So they came up with a whole bunch of symbols. They proposed using a cookie. We said, look, that's interesting, but I don't know. Is every website going to put a cookie? So they made a chocolate chip cookie. We tested a number of symbols and various language. And how little testing happens over the years. Having worked in this for maybe 10 years, I hadn't ever sat in a room with consumers, users, individuals, and watched behind a glass screen as they were asked questions and as they looked at it. So for instance, one of the languages that we tested next to a symbol was, why did I get this ad? And we tested this because we knew that was one of the things the FTC wanted. They didn't want info about. That's not going to tell a user, hey, something's here that you might want to know about. So we tested words like interest-based ads or about advertising and so forth. But we also tested, why did I get this ad? Which seemed like the biggest, blatant, most obvious example, right? It's better than interest-based ad, you would think. Why did I get this ad? So here was the reaction of the users. They said to us, what are you asking me a question for? I'm visiting the website. I'm checking my weather. I got to get my mail. You're asking me? So what, are you tricking me to, what if I'm not interested? Or what if I can't click back and I find out that I wasted my time? They said, tell me something, and then I'll decide whether I want to go further. So those sorts of insights, instead of, am I legally saying this in a technical way, which is what we've been focused on, but rather, what is the user actually understanding by what we say to them? So we proposed an eye with a circle around it that looked a little bit like an on-off switch, that looked a little bit like an info eye. Saul Hansel, many of you know, one of the technology reporters for many years at the New York Times, he said to us, if you create a scary eyeball, because he was a very big critic of behavioral advertising, he said, if you create a scary eyeball, like I think Rosa wanted, a scary eyeball, I will write a story saying this is the best example. So I said, listen, I don't think the industry will accept a scary eyeball. What about a friendly eyeball? Because the point is that you're being watched, that there's something happening here. So will you allow the businesses to, you know, sell what they're doing, but sell it, you know, that, hey, I'm using your data to try to do something for you. He said, fine. So we released that. The industry groups looked at it, they've tweaked it a little bit, and they aren't doing the exact symbol, but they're doing something inspired by it, and Anne is going to show us what it looks like and how it'll work.
So I need my slides now.
We need the Yahoo slide, please.
There we go. And I won't go through the whole thing because I know it's very, oh, look, yeah, this is actually an old presentation I did and presented in Canada, so you get it in French too. So I will go right through here. So the first iteration of this as a proof of concept, we went with ad choices, and it's not really a friendly eyeball so much as it is an eye in a circle. We use this to test this whole concept. We call it Clear Ad Notice. Clear stands for Control Links for Educating and Advertising Responsibly. It's only slightly less tortured than Best Practices Act. So but it is, you know, Washington likes acronyms, and we are based in the U.S. So, but it is actually very descriptive of what we're trying to do here. This whole concept is actually not just about icons and labels. That's a visual cue to the consumer to interact with this marker, to learn more, and to be able to opt out directly wherever an ad is being served. And I think that that contextualization of privacy is really important. But what's even more important in this model is in this particular, and this is a future version of this that we were testing, we're trying to boil down into some relevant fields what we think consumers might need to know to be able to make an informed decision about behavioral advertising. So in this case, these are some fields that are coded with the ad delivery. So Jules talked about the complexity of all the different people who interact with cookies or touch a cookie or are involved in the ad serving process. We thought that it might make sense to use technology to basically inform this process, to be able to inform consumers so that this data, this metadata, travels with the ad wherever the ad is delivered, wherever it lands on any publisher site. We can convey to you simply who the advertiser is, who the ad is delivered by, in this case by Yahoo. In the case of data being contributed to the advertising process for customization, sometimes it's the ad network and sometimes it's a third party, as Jules' slide depicted. So we can call that out separately, and we can offer an opt-out from the entity who customized the ad. We can also include an industry opt-out link or a link to more information. And these are just, this is conceptual again. This is there to show that actually there are a lot of different types of data that we can embed in this process and we can choose to surface to the consumer. But the idea is that we have a standard that not just Yahoo is using, but a standard that the industry is committed to. You know, 10 years ago, there was this organization called the Network Advertising Initiative, and the relationship that publishers had was typically to one or two ad networks, and they would disclose it, it would be available. There are many, many, many more ad networks now, but what's really promising is it's not just ad networks that are sitting around a table trying to figure out what the best practices should be. There's actually in the United States a coalition of 5,000 companies represented by the Association of National Advertisers, the agencies trade association, as well as the IAB, the DMA, other organizations as well. And this is really powerful because it's the first time that you have cooperation across all parts of the ecosystem that touch online advertising. That same model is actually beginning to come into play in Europe as well. The IAB EU has been working on self-regulatory principles and working with trade associations to do something similar. And this is where self-regulation has, I think, a fighting chance at actually working when it's a co-regulatory model where you have companies all across the various parts of the ecosystem working collaboratively. So I won't take up much more time. We have many more people here who have yet to speak. But I wanted to show you one other... I'm stuck. Well, so one of the things I just wanted to show you here is this, where we're going with the icon, is this new, this doesn't want to work for me here, ad marker implementation. So these are different ways that the ad marker can be surfaced. We were using the eye in a circle. We're actually now using what's referred to as the forward eye, because unbeknownst to us, eye in a circle is a trademarked, I should probably go to the other panel about IP and whatnot. But we are moving to this other icon that we are adopting, and we are in the process of rolling it out. There was, I think, some warranted criticism that this hasn't been moving as fast as the FTC and regulators would like, but we have a lot of companies involved, and I think what's really exciting is now that we have an agreed upon symbol, we have companies on board and committed, I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of this.
So Anne, is anything going to be done to tell users, like if I look at that, does it mean anything to me? Is there going to be education?
Absolutely. The whole goal
and
with
then
this,
will anyone come back and test whether it's actually working in 6 months or a year?
I think that's critical. I think that's really critical to this. People have been asking, how are consumers going to know? And I think if you look at any symbol, it could be a pink elephant, it could be an asterisk, it could be anything. There's an education period where you have to explain whether, and I think recycling symbols are perhaps the example that I go to most often. In the 70s, I don't think anyone would have known what that means. Today it's ubiquitous and everyone knows if you see recycling symbol, that's where you put your cans and your bottles. The goal is here to raise awareness and to do that using online advertising, to do outreach, to do education about what this symbol means, so that then we can actually have some confidence that consumers are...
Maybe we should ask Lori Craner or Alessandro Cristi to do their testing on it in 6 months or a year and, have sort of their take as well. So, Kirsten, over the years, there are companies that do behavioral in Europe. There have been a host of opinions by regulators in the Article 29 Working Party that have declared that in some cases, in many cases, a behavioral profile that lets a company relate to an individual even if their name is not attached, maybe because there's an IP address, maybe because it lets me treat the user differently than other users, that is perhaps personal, could be personal. How has the Europrice seal dealt with behavioral advertising? You see what some of the companies are doing. Are there any additional things that Wonderloop or Nug.ad or a number of the companies that have received the seal have done in addition to some of this?
Yeah, I will get back to your question later on. But first let me get back to Fran's question, which I think, have answered only in part. I mean, what I've heard so far sounds great. What is the backside? Where's the harm? The harm of behavioral advertising clearly is building up very detailed, very persistent profiles of people. So having this in mind, and knowing that, on the other hand, there is some value for the user, having access to websites and services free of charge, we came up with our initiative, the European Privacy Seal, together with our colleagues from Madrid and the French CNIL and some other partners, to build up a certification scheme in order to help companies to provide to the regulations that are set out in the European directives on privacy. And we've started in 2007 in a pilot phase, which went very, very successfully. So we went into full operation in 2009, and since then we have completed 15 successful certifications with more than 25 ongoing projects, and among those are a number of behavioral targeting providers. We are not doing that we are DPA. We don't have the means to check all these companies who are asking for certification. We are working with accredited experts from around the world who are trained by us, who know how to apply our criteria, and they basically do the evaluation work and hand in very detailed reports that we check for consistency and compliance, and in order to have a comparable level of certification. And we are, as I said, we're doing that on the basis of the European directives. So whatever Rosa said in the beginning fully applies to our certification criteria. And what we basically did during the project phase was to translate the European directives on privacy into concrete basic questions that a company would have to follow and ask when developing a service or offering a service. And these criteria are actually divided into 4 different sets. We're dealing with fundamental aspects of processing and the technical construction of the service. We're dealing in the second set with the legitimacy of data processing. We are dealing in the third set with the technical organizational measures, and in a fourth set with the data subject's rights. So that's just to provide you with a basic overview. Our criteria are public. You can download them, or they are available at the publication stand. So you can have a look to what we are doing. With regard to behavioral advertising, we have, of course, a specific requirements, and I will mention a few of them to you, which are of importance and to some extent have been changed by the new e-privacy directive that Rosa already pointed out. So when we are looking at a behavioral targeting service with respect to that and to the use of cookies that is behind that, we are specifically looking at a limited lifespan of cookies, so that is one of the requirements. We have a look at the granularity of the categories used to classify user behavior, and that is a limited number of categories, so we do not allow sensitive categories, and that is based on the interpretation of the European directive, so that is somewhat a tighter frame. Then we look at profile pseudonymity, and maybe we can have Jules' slide back on the screen, because then maybe it's easier to describe.
You guys could pull up the first slide, the big, complicated, confusing, jumble one.
I go on, and I get back to that later. So we would like, not to have the individual user at the end to be identified by the ad network provider. We ask for opt-out mechanisms, of course, and very important friendly information practices. That means easy to understand, layered information, as has been mentioned.
So it is possible, if you take the right steps, or at least for the last years, it has been possible to do behavioral advertising in Europe in a way that is legally compliant with the directive if one takes a number of perhaps additional steps, being more careful about IP addresses,
yes,
sensitive data categories, being more conservative than maybe some, having expiration periods. So to jump and start mixing it up a little bit, I guess 10 years ago, everyone kept all the data forever in the world of search engines and ad networks. The Article 29 group, to its credit, pushed, particularly following release of search data by AOL, pushed, and the companies have started now narrowing their retention periods, both for search data and for ad serving log files. So lots of companies now have retention periods. Okay.
We do.
You do? All right.
So do we.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes to...
Because we had the U.S. sort of leading there for a while, but now it looks like the pressure the last couple of years in terms of some of these important issues has been, the guidance has been coming by some of the companies who are complying with the seal, and then the pressure as well from some of the regulators who are asking, why do you really need this for this long? Think twice and then tell us what the period of time is.
I think it's actually an area that's very interesting. If you look at the data retention discussion in general, there's been, or if you look even at privacy features that companies offer, there's been a certain one-upsmanship in the marketplace that I think is a healthy competition that benefits consumers. Google came out with their ad preferences manager. We came out with ad interest manager a month later. A month after we launched, Microsoft launched their tool in the marketplace. We're all collaborating on a common icon because we think that's one place actually where we all need to agree on something rather than to confuse consumers. But we're all actually expressing, I think, an interest in innovating around privacy and competing around privacy. Likewise with data retention, our first data retention policy was announced at 13 months before we anonymized data, and only for search log file data. When we went back, we reduced the period to 90 days and we applied it to all of our log file data globally, regardless of search or ad network data. All of it was treated the same way, which I think is a downward pressure that's been good for consumers, really.
Very often when I read about IP addresses, I hear about people using them for tracking. I see that a lot. Do ad networks use IP addresses to track users?
We don't. Our ad serving logs, just by virtue of the ad serve itself, would record the IP address. But then we create our IBA logs and we take off the IP address and we just track by cookie ID.
So generally, I think across the industry, it's fair to say that the cookie is the tracking tool, and the IP address, A, has to be received because got to send something back, but then perhaps is kept for a number of reasons. Is there any targeting that is done that's related to the IP address? People probably know about geo-targeting in the audience, right?
Yeah, geo-targeting.
Is there other targeting that's done based on that IP address? I know some companies, for instance, there are some companies, for instance, though, that many of the blocks of IP addresses actually belong to specific industries. Many of the early companies got big blocks. So IBM owns a big range of IP addresses. Cisco owns. So to some degree, there sometimes is targeting based on this is somebody from a technology company because we know those IP addresses. But otherwise...
Yeah, by and large, that's not commonplace. I think at one point there might have been recognition of certain universities and using that to be able to show, you know, university-specific type targeting. But for the most part, IP address is used for geographic location.
So then why are people holding them at all if there's not such a big, robust? What's the fraud issue?
There's this thing called fraud. Yeah, it's not trivial, actually, the fraud issue and the security issues that accompany. You know, if you're running a website and there's fraud specific to the ad network, but I think you know, Yahoo wears a lot of different hats. And so we actually have a specific provision of our data retention policy that pertains to certain log files where we keep them for up to 6 months that are specific to fraud and security systems. And IP addresses are a key component of that, but that's not the only thing that we look at for fraud prevention. We actually remove the entire IP address at 90 days for all of our log file systems. That's been our general policy. But you know, I'm not hearing about people using IP address as a means of targeting. I think there has been a lot of focus on this notion of flash cookies or LSOs or non-traditional cookies or Frankenstein cookies. And I'm just, you know, to be clear, those kinds of practices are not consistent with self-regulation and industry best practices. They tend to be rogue players in the marketplace. Anything that is out there with the intention of circumventing a user's expressed preference not to receive behavioral advertising is something that, frankly, should be the subject of an enforcement action.
Stick with the IP address just for a second longer. So, fraud. So, Kirsten, what is it that companies that are going to get a Europrice seal, they have fraud issues as well? How or what do they do? So if the concern we've established, at least for most companies, isn't that this is the tracking tool, the legal concern presumably is that this is a potentially identifiable item in the hands of the ISP, in the hands of law enforcement. This is a link to an actual user if there's extra process, that legal process or the like. So that's the potential risk of an identification. What do the Europrice seal companies do or have to do under European law to be more careful about IP addresses?
Well, first of all, to lock an IP address for more than 24 hours is a problem, because also for fraud reasons you don't need that much time, longer than 24 hours. The best thing that we've seen is a hash of the IP address. And you can also use a double hash. That makes it even more secure, where the company hashes the IP address for the fraud purpose reason, and then, you know, it just checks the hash. So that is actually a workable way to not, you know, actually lock the IP address.
Yeah, I actually would not agree on the 24 hours for fraud purposes, especially for a certain of our non-IBA ads. We do pay-per-click. So if you're an advertiser, you buy an ad, and they only have to pay us if someone clicks on the ad. So we needed to combat against click fraud, and we definitely need it for over 24 hours because there's a lot of trends that you see in click fraud. There are bots out there. It's not just individual machines anymore. Sometimes groups of machines are being taken over, and as we've heard on the other side of our house, on the security side, and cyber fraud is a growing area.
So Fran, what does a trustee in its certification do to ensure that companies are following a set of rules here?
Well, I think what we heard is especially in regard to IP addresses and so on, that there are some best practices that relate to privacy, and trustee looks at the consent experience that the consumer has, looks at the privacy policy, and makes sure that any short notices are consistent with that. We do some website scanning so we can pick up what cookies are dropped, where they're dropped. We look at whether or not age information is collected, for example. So we have over just about 4,000 companies with the trustee mark. Many of them are publishers. Many of them were serving behavioral advertising, sometimes from either Google or Yahoo or Microsoft or other ad networks. And as this issue gains speed and importance in the US and Europe, the FTC guidelines came out, and then, as Ann mentioned earlier, the group of ad agencies, advertisers, advertising networks, a whole group of us got together and we're looking at the solution sets. And we started out first looking at a publisher solution because most of trustees, seal holders, are actually publishers, and they were concerned about how do they comply. And like Yahoo, we recognized there was just so little data out there about what's going to happen. There was so much concern about whether or not this would ruin the advertising marketplace, the ecosystem, whether or not consumers could really get any value from enhanced notices, whether or not they would opt out, and I'm sure Google and Yahoo both have information about opt-ins. But I'd like to share with you what we found with our early implementation, and if I could have the trustee slides. Is that okay,
That's in
Jules?
the first deck, the second, third.
Right. So this is an example, and we had a couple of pilot participants and many more in the queue. This is PCH Lotto Publishers Clearinghouse. And they decided to use the words interest-based ads, which was one of the phrases that was tested. And in this implementation, we were using the trustee icon because at this time we knew there was all these issues with this icon and people trust trustee, and so let's see if that makes a difference. And we think it does, but it also, I think, there's something to be said about the industry getting behind one icon because that's a good way to get consumers to understand what's going on. So over about a 4-month period, we served 15 million impressions. And overall, the click-through rate, and in this example, it's next to the ad, but other implementations had it at the footer. The click-through rate was a little bit higher than the click-through rate of the privacy policy. So I think that shows it kind of stuck out. Now, you could look at this one and think, well, maybe green against the blue doesn't, but this is the example I'm showing today. Can we go to the next one? Oh, yeah,
Click
I
away.
need the clicker. Thank
So
you.
when you click on that little symbol, this is what you got?
Yeah, this is what you got. And in fact, if you didn't have any cookies, you'd get something that would say, well, you don't have any cookies here. So, but apparently I had some cookies. We tried to, in this version, show, hey, there's 3 steps. Here's the notice, here's what's happening here. Step 2 is let's set your preferences, and the last step is get some feedback. Because again, this is a pilot, and we just wanted to know what people thought. And what we found was about 10% of the people, a little bit more, and it varied, went to that second step of setting their preferences. But a lot of people were satisfied with, or maybe they weren't satisfied, but that's why we had the feedback. A lot of people were satisfied with just getting the information that they had here. And you can see here we tried to explain what are interest-based ads and what are ad networks. And we all know that we're still at the beginning, and Anna and Jane both talked about we have to get some education out here. So second step would be the next slide, and I do this arrow. Oh. Okay. So when they got to the preference page, they were shown in the box on the right all the ad networks that were tracking them on the website. In fact, it probably showed every tracking cookie that was available. And the consumer could choose, and this is still live, you could go look at it yourself, whether or not to opt out. They could see whether or not the ad network was a member of NAI or trustee. They could learn more about the privacy policy of that ad network. And of course, they could choose different things. Now, we didn't pre-check the box, but basically you could do, I want to continue to view ads based on my interest, or I want to partially opt out, and then they could check individual boxes on the right.
So Fran, let me understand. So the industry program right now doesn't require, it does require similarly the icon to take you to a display of the ad networks that are involved and then an opt-out. Okay. Go ahead.
This was a publisher implementation before all of this got worked out. And then the third option, and this is the one that if they opted out or changed anything, they chose to opt out of all networks. So in other words, the motivated consumer or individual who was concerned about their privacy and tracking they weren't making granular choices of I want to opt into Yahoo and opt out of Google or vice versa. They just wanted out. A small percentage, I'd say maybe 1/4%, chose granular. It's not clear to me these people were not people who were just testing what the system worked out.
So is there a lot of benefit in showing the user all the specific
I'm not
networks,
sure. I think that's something we're going to have to learn more about. And I think over time, what you see in something like this, and again, this was a pilot and a proof of concept, is that there is an opportunity to deliver an experience, a short notice with choices outside the privacy policy. And I think consumers are going to find it useful. And maybe instead of this, it could be also, if you're a publisher, notice of retargeting or notice of other kinds of tracking. If you're an advertiser, maybe there could be even notices of whether or not there's malware or something else.
One question I have. This allows you to opt out from all the...
Yeah.
Could you be done reverse? Could you opt in one time for all of them? So this will stop this criticism that there is that you have to opt in for each ad network. So could you construct something that will be reversed?
Oh, I'm sure that's technically possible.
I think the challenge there is going to be, likewise, it's just a question of whether that opt-in is a repetitive action that the user has to take and the user experience. So the question is always about the durability of the opt-outs, the durability of the opt-ins, and we have durable opt-outs. The question again about the opt-in is the durability of the opt-out. It's the same sort of question about cookies, and I think it's kind of an interesting...
I think they've yet to find the individual who wants to opt in to a lot of advertising, so
but,
I don't know.
But I think they are willing to opt into profiles related to
At this point, the cookie's already been served.
Right.
So, because what this is reading is the cookies that were served in connection with this ad, so the cookies have already been served.
And
So
actually, let me
to
clarify,
opt in-
this is on a publisher basis,
Right.
so this was pulling everything that was on that publisher's domain.
So let's look also at the number. So here, when people got here, 1% did something in terms of making a change. Can I quote these numbers? That so some of the numbers that Google has put out, and I mentioned them at the OECD for those who were there. For every 15 people who make it to the ad preferences page there, 10 don't do anything. They don't change the settings. 4 change the ads they're shown. They click, this is my profile, not that. They tweak it. And 1 opts out. So interesting to see and understand whether, is this because they're so confused? Is it because once they are given some control, they feel better? Or is
That's why we did the
or is it
feedback.
that they're complicated?
So that's what we asked. So we asked the people who opted out, and remember it's a small number. Okay, why did they opt out? And 20% said behavioral advertising, or something along those lines. 20%, well actually it was a checkbox. 20% said security, which is not something we expected. Another 20% just said basically sharing. We did say other with a right in, and a large number said they just don't want advertising.
So I want to come back to Europe. So we've had recent guidance in the past year. The Article 29 Working Party has an additional opinion on behavioral advertising. We have the telecom directive with language about cookies. I guess there was some news today about what was intended by the change in language, and everyone is debating what it means, what is necessary to get whatever enhancement is required. So Kirsten has the reality of sites that are have a seal. How are you handling? You put out some guidance that reflected your thinking now that these changes are in place. Are these types of things in the ballpark of what someone might need to do? Is it this plus more? Is this still to be clarified? You put out a very interesting opinion on that. Would you share a little bit?
Well, yes, that's certainly something, working in the right direction. As you know, the Article 29 Working Party has called for a discussion period, and we are right in the middle of that.
So we are doing the discussing.
We are doing the discussing now, and actually, waiting for the industry to come up with suggestions, and those are suggestions that I think work in the right direction. However, the e-privacy directive asked for explicit and informed consent to place a cookie on a user's website, or to use a placed cookie on the user website. And under these new regulations, the e-privacy directive asks to, with the information that needs to be provided in this respect, to identify the controller of the data, which would be one requirement, the purpose of the processing that would have been to be included in these notices, the lifetime of the cookie that is going to be placed, the fact that it is used for tracking, and whether it is used for tracking of one particular website or for multiple websites. And
wow, it sounds like
then
it's going to look like
needs
the
to get
dashboard of the 747 all of a sudden.
well, that's you know, that's the requirement so far. So far, what we have done, because you know we are currently certifying companies, and we have committed ourselves to directly use the European directives as they come out. That means that we are in a pre-phase. Even the national legislators have to implement the directives in May 2011. We are already using this, but as we are realistic and we know there is no one out there who can provide us with a service that is actually in compliance with these new directives, and it has not been implemented into concrete law yet, we also allow for a transitional period. But what we want to see from those companies who are going through certification is that they enhance the information they are providing to the users, to the end users, that they come up with icons like we've seen, and that they also set up a system to test opt-in mechanisms. Because what companies tell us is the same figures that you have here, you know, for opting out are expected to be the same figures for opt-in. So if you have 4% of opting out, then you have 4% of opt-ins.
Alessandro at the OECD event cited some interesting statistics of organ donor cards, where if it's, which is a bigger decision where someone might think a little more than they might think about it, and we kind of are left with people, even on a decision that is, you know, quite consequential, really don't do anything, period. They accept the status quo. So I understand perhaps why their businesses are apprehensive about interrupting people and saying, please, can we have a discussion instead of getting your mail? Can we do some other things that might also maybe help, right? Because it sounds like it's not just one piece. There's a lot of pieces that could be improved, that would be innovations that might get closer, that might provide a minimization, make things less personal. So we saw an opt-out, and we talked about how that opt-out cookie gets deleted and the user is back in, even though they think they did some extra privacy. Instead, they got zero privacy. And so you heard from the businesses that they now provide a plugin that after you opt out, you can download and it will protect it. Can the browser companies help us out here maybe, so that if someone opts out and they've said something, that it sticks? Should they use a scary flash cookie, which we are told doesn't get easily deleted? Should we use it for good and stick the preference in? Could we use an opt-out header? Can P3P help? Is there room to improve?
I think you're bringing up that there's just a lot of things we don't know yet. And this is still very nascent. I think in 10 years, I think, especially with the work with the DAA, the Digital Alliance, and the companies that are taking leadership position here, we're going to, at least in the U.S., deliver to consumers outside the privacy policy an effective opt-out or opt-in experience into profiles.
Now, what about the mobile? We hear that mobile is real big. Are the mobile companies doing, there are mobile ad networks?
Right, and the MMA is about to release, I think there's some people here who are aware of this, some guidelines for mobile advertising. Mobile advertising, behavioral advertising on mobile is still also very nascent, but Apple discloses that in their policy. So are they doing some sort of notice? Are they doing opt-outs yet? Or? Apple is, I know, on the iPhone. You could probably address what you're doing on Android.
We're currently not doing IBA on the mobile platform.
Okay.
A number of the leading third-party ad networks who do behavioral do have opt-outs, I guess. I don't know that anyone's using any sort of icon yet.
No, we're not, but I think the icon lends itself well to that environment.
Could-
That's one
could
of the
be
things
used.
that makes it
Okay.
nice.
And our mobile notice is trying to give consumers some notice of whether or not they're being tracked on a given mobile app.
And can the mobile folks show the user their mobile surfing profile as well?
We don't have a mobile surfing profile today. That doesn't exist. But what we have done is our method of making the opt-out sticky is to associate it with a Yahoo account. So if you are a Yahoo user, you have a Yahoo account, you're logged in at the time you exercise your opt-out, it's associated with your account so that every time you log in for any purpose, you refresh that opt-out on a periodic basis. That also ports over to the mobile device. So if you download an application, you log into your Yahoo account through an application, we'll actually leave behind an opt-out cookie on your mobile, not because we're actively targeting or serving ads that are behavioral in the mobile environment, but because we think we might someday, and we want users to have that opt-out be portable without having to take specific separate action to make that happen.
Now, I read the other day a cover story in one of the popular magazines that the web is dead and that it's all about apps, and that's where people are really spending a lot of time. I saw that in the US, more time is being spent with apps than watching television, which is mind-boggling. So if the app is now the big data collector and the app developer is one person sitting somewhere in the world or figuring out how to poke his friend, are they mature enough yet to be figuring out that they are subject to the legislation around the world and all these requirements?
You know, you bring up some issues with mobile that I think are interesting, and let's consider a few things.
And those are not just mobile, right?
What's the concern about on mobile? I think most of us would agree being tracked by our location is a little bit more concerning and could be more scary and dangerous. There's a stalker situation, there's all kinds of situations, than being served an ad that might be a little creepy because it's a little bit more targeted to you.
So some recent advances that are worth pointing out there is that some of the mobile devices, some of the Verizon devices, the AT&T iPhone, I think a number of others, will show you who has
Absolutely.
recently accessed your location. So I figured I would test it, and I have a little battery app, and all it does is it tells me, better than the regular battery thing, how empty or full my battery is. And it was on the list of apps that has been accessing my location. And I was trying to figure out, is it going to tell me where to charge it, where to recharge it? Of course, it turned out that it has some local advertising, which was okay with me, but it would have been nice if they asked me, and maybe I would have been okay with it, or decided, or said, hey, it's free, okay, or not. So we're seeing some of those tools starting to show up. I guess the other thing that's useful is, how am I learning that location is being shared with anybody here? I am getting a little arrow, right? Not an eye or a symbol, but I am getting an arrow, and I think that's one thing that perhaps might be nice to see many do, to not give me a privacy policy, but give me some nice little something.
Our mobile certification requires that if you're tracking on mobile, you've got to give some notice about that, and not just notice and get express consent. So we're only on a few platforms, BlackBerry, Android, and iPhone, because we know that that is delivered in that way.
I think we have time for one question. Who's got the biggest, bestest, smartest question? Whoever's the most anxious has it, so there we go.
Hello, Janine McKelvey from Warner Brothers. My question is for Rosa. In the sessions that I've been sitting in, I've heard a lot about surveys and studies into how people feel about their data being used in relation to cookies and privacy policies. And a lot of these studies have been done in the US. I'm not hearing anything about studies being done in Europe. And given the wide impact that the proposed legislation is going to have in relation to cookies for Europe, are you and others within the European Commission looking at any studies that have been done about individuals' choices in relation to their data in Europe? Or are you aware of any studies being done?
My office, particularly, I am not aware of any study being done in Europe. So what has been available has been indeed what has been done in the United States. Now, it's possible that, I work for the DPS, there is the European Commission, there is the Information Society, and I would not be surprised that such studies are taking place, but I personally am not aware.
One more quick one. Yes, gentleman back.
1 minute. Would it be too much to ask to have the Yahoo slide back on?
If they have it quickly,
Okay.
the mumbo jumbo one?
No, the Yahoo one.
Which one?
The Yahoo slide deck.
The Yahoo slide?
Yeah, Yahoo, yes.
I'll tell you what, if you can bring it up, but meanwhile...
Okay,
go
and
ahead.
the one that shows the ad example. I think it was the fourth one. Yeah, that one. No, back one. Right, that one, yeah. So it says, I think 500 font size, clear ad notice proof of concept, and a huge arrow pointing to something I can't see from here.
It's actually it actually takes over the location of what was our ad label marker. So it's actually quite prominent on the ad placement. I don't think it's.
So it's nothing against Yahoo, but I'm just wondering how many, because I've never seen some any message like that before, and now I'll give it special attention. But
we've served over 1 trillion of them on Yahoo, actually, on the Yahoo homepage and on Yahoo Mail, which are our two most popular pages. Now, they're all actually only running in the United States right now, because this is where the industry trade association efforts have coalesced around an icon. But our intention is to roll it out globally, and our goal is to educate around it. In fact, we've run 250 million banner campaigns, banner ads, for about 18 months on Yahoo to drive awareness about this, and we've donated ad inventory to the Interactive Advertising Bureau and others. So we're very committed to raising consumer awareness. If you haven't seen it yet, our goal is that you will, and our hope is that you'll understand what it means and you'll interact with it.
And we have used ads by Google on our Google Display Network, and it's in the bottom right-hand corner.
So in summary...
Can I say something? I think that this is a very good initiative, but if this has to be the basis for people to object, it is absolutely necessary that this becomes very well known. It's the basis. Unless we have this as something that people immediately understand, oh, this means that I can opt out.
You mean like when I want the men's room, I know there's a symbol, and that's where I got to go?
That's what we need
so
to get.
So that's what we're looking for.
Otherwise, it would not be able to give a meaningful consent.
And the goal is, with 5,000 different companies participating in the U.S. alone, and that's twice as many as in the safe harbor, I just learned, right? So that is, the idea is that if every single ad you see has the same logo, the same icon, everywhere you go, that's got to drive awareness. That's got to start to make an impression on consumers, and coupled with educational outreach to consumers, the hope is that this becomes something that we can demonstrate makes an impact. I mean, that's the entire purpose around it.
So in summary, 10 years ago we had a system of behavioral ads. Now we have a system of behavioral ads plus lots of other data being layered on top of it. Users are starting to see some information, although that's not been adopted by the industry group. Some of the leading companies are implementing this. AT&T does it with its partners. Yahoo, Google does it. AOL, I believe, is working on it. A number do. Not all of them do yet. We see varying rules about what's sensitive. Some companies doing some health, some doing terrible health. We see improvement, some doing no health at all. We see the opt-out a little bit improving, a plug-in. We don't know yet whether we'll get something better, whether maybe the browsers will help solve this for us. And we see the most big change, something coming from secretly in the privacy policy to being a small label. We hear we'd like it to be a big label, and we'll see soon whether this pace of innovation will satisfy the FTC, whether it will satisfy the regulators around the world. So I thank all of you who've been playing such a key role in this discussion, and I thank you all for being a good audience.